Put a group of strangers in a room together, and they will form a predictable ecosystem. Like any individual relationship, a group develops over time, moving through a distinct life cycle. For a clinical leader, understanding this progression is a navigational tool. It dictates exactly what behaviors to expect and which interventions will actually work. A widely used framework, drawn from Bruce Tuckman, maps this evolution across 5 stages. It begins with forming. When members first come together, the atmosphere is cautious, anxiety is high. People are tentative, polite, and unsure of the rules, looking entirely to the leader to provide a sense of structure. In this initial stage, the leader's tasks focus on establishing safety, clarifying the group's purpose, and laying groundwork for initial trust to reduce collective anxiety. As members begin to feel more comfortable, the group enters storming. The politeness drops, conflict emerges. Members begin testing the boundaries, testing each other, and pushing back against the leader. This friction is normal. In fact, it is necessary. A group that avoids the storming phase usually remains polite, safe, and superficial. The leader's objective here is not to suppress the tension. The goal is to contain the conflict, to demonstrate to the group that disagreement is survivable. Once the group navigates that friction, it enters norming. The room settles. Members develop shared expectations, trust deepens, and the collection of individuals begins to function as a cohesive unit. During norming, the leader steps back slightly, reinforcing these newly established expectations and actively supporting the emerging cohesion. This stability gives way to performing. The group is now mature. Members take emotional risks, deliver honest feedback to one another, and do the heavy lifting of therapeutic work. The leader's posture shifts accordingly. They become less directive, trusting the group's own capacity to guide the session. Eventually, every group reaches adjourning, or termination. As the group prepares to disband, feelings of loss, abandonment, and accomplishment rise to the surface. The leader must prepare the room for this ending well in advance. They guide the group in processing the loss, consolidating the gains each member has made, and mapping the transition to whatever comes next. This 5-stage progression is rarely a straight line. Groups frequently cycle back to earlier stages, especially in open groups where new members arrive and old members depart. Mastering this framework gives the leader a diagnostic lens. By recognizing the current stage of the cycle, they can accurately meet the shifting developmental needs of the system. Holding a group together requires a leader to wear multiple hats simultaneously, operating on several distinct psychological levels. They manage the heavy structural tasks, selecting the right mix of members, preparing them for the setting, and holding the boundaries of the group's norms. They balance the macro and the micro, monitoring the overarching emotional climate of the room, while simultaneously drawing out a withdrawn member and gently containing one who is dominating the airtime. They carry protective responsibilities. They must link members' stories together to build connection, shield vulnerable clients from psychological harm, and immediately interrupt any attempt by the group to single out a scapegoat. Internally, the leader is fighting a silent battle. The intensity of a group setting can intensify countertransference, forcing the leader to rigorously manage their own emotional reactions in real time. This role requires holding the welfare of every member in one hand and the needs of the collective group in the other, balancing the one and the many simultaneously. To manage this environment, effective leaders rely on a calibrated set of clinical interventions, deployed moment to moment. The foundation is active listening and reflection. This translates the core conditions of one-on-one therapy, empathy and regard, into a multi-person context. Then there is blocking. This is the gentle interruption of harmful interactions. If a member launches a personal attack, gossips, or breaches confidentiality, the leader steps in to halt the interaction. Linking acts as the connective tissue of the group. The leader explicitly connects one member's story to another's, architecting interaction where there was once isolation. Supporting and confronting requires a dual edge. The leader offers encouragement while also compassionately pointing out discrepancies in a member's behavior or narrative. Through summarizing, the leader acts as the group's memory, pulling together threads from a session to highlight themes and track collective progress. And finally, process commentary. the act of stepping back and pointing out the group's own behavioral patterns, making the room consciously aware of how it is operating. Together, these discrete interventions function as guardrails. They keep the raw momentum of the group aligned toward clinical growth. The way these skills are applied is not static. Leadership style exists on a fluid continuum, shifting from highly directive at one end to highly facilitative at the other. A directive approach relies on structure. The leader drives the conversation, manages the activities, and delivers clear educational content directly to the members. A facilitative approach sits at the opposite pole. It is member-driven, focused deeply on internal processes, and requires minimal overt control from the leader. Neither style is inherently correct. The measure of a leader's skill is their ability to flex across this continuum, matching their style to the capacity of the group. Psychoeducational settings, brand new groups, and fragile clients often call for a more directive style. They need the structure to feel grounded. Mature interpersonal process groups call for a facilitative style. They have the emotional capacity to navigate ambiguity and generate their own momentum. Rigidity limits the group's potential. A strictly directive leader can stifle a mature group's capacity for work, while a leader who remains hands-off with a fragile group often leaves members feeling unsafe. To flex leadership style effectively, a clinician must distinguish between the group's content and its process. Content is the surface layer. It is exactly what the group is talking about: the topics, the factual histories, and the stories members share. Process is the hidden layer beneath the words. It is what is actually happening between the members as they speak. It tracks who speaks to whom, who stays silent, and what specific topics are actively avoided. Process encompasses how conflict is managed, the emotional undercurrents flooding the room, and the patterns of interaction that repeat session after session. Novice leaders focus entirely on content, caught up in stories. Skilled leaders track the process, observing dynamics in the negative space between the chairs. By naming these dynamics aloud, the leader utilizes process commentary, an intervention that brings the group's living patterns directly into the light for examination. Its power lies in its immediacy. It takes the unspoken tensions of the group and makes them available for everyone in the room to analyze and learn from. But the art of this intervention relies entirely on timing. A process comment lands successfully only when trust is sufficient and the observation is delivered with care, offered as a tool for insight, not a trap.